Hey. Okay. We'll be able to get now. Can you check? Hey. Yeah. You cannot hear me? Hello? Can you guys hear me? Hello? Hello?
Yes, Akhil, you're audible.
Cool. So let's start. Just a second, guys.
This one? This side? Yeah. Any bigger ears? Kind of. Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. We'll get started in 1 minute. Yeah? Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for the people who came to the room. Thank you for everybody who's online participating. So my name is Per Persson. I'm the VP of International Sales for WilliamsAV. So I handle our export sales, including to Dubai and the Middle East. So today, this is the agenda. If I can get the clicker to work. So I will talk about 3 of the main areas we're active in as WilliamsAV. So the first part is assistive listening, which is maybe what we're most well known for. Then we'll speak after that. We'll have a brief coffee break. Then we'll speak a little bit about Intercom and Tourguide solutions. And then finally, our Pro-AV language solutions, which includes interpretation, as well as our new AI-based automatic translation system. For anybody who's participating, please make sure you share the email address with us, and we will then send you training certificates for participating in the training today. And then final, very important note for everybody in the room, we do have some food. Unfortunately, we can't send the food via Teams, but if you're in the room, we will have some food for you. So with that, I will get started. So first, a brief overview of WilliamsAV. We were founded back in 1976 by Jerry Williams, which is why we're called Williams. We do most of our manufacturing in the US, so all of our rack-mounted units, so the IR Plus here, the Convey system, we build this in our own factory in Minneapolis in the United States. We export to about 60 countries worldwide, including all of GCC, Europe, Asia, many countries in Africa, etc. Since about a year and a half, we're a preferred vendor partner for the PSNI Global Alliance, which is an integrator alliance that spans the world. We have the local support here with NMK, with Akhil and the technical team, with the business development team. But we also have a in-house design team. So if you have any more complicated designs, loop designs, etc., it's a service that we provide as well from the US. So as a company, we were founded doing assistive listening 45 years ago. And we have a number of different technologies supporting that. So that's part of the first part of the training is really comparing and contrasting the different technologies for assistive listening to make sure that you choose the right technology depending on your application. We also work with interpretation. And now since we also have the AI based, we have to specify that this is human interpretation. Have a number of different technologies for that. Wireless intercom is another business we're involved in. And then in 2017, so about 4 years ago now, we decided that we wanted to get into the V world of the AV industry. So we bought a company called PointMaker that had been working with video annotation for about 25 years. And with that video, we're able to produce some new products, including our AI-based video products. So, unfortunately, the presentation isn't over. Now it really starts. So you have to stick around for a little bit longer. So, the first part I want to talk to you guys about is assistive listening. So here's the assistive listening part. The good news is I already did the overview, so we can skip that. I will speak a little bit about assistive listening information. Why do you need it? What does it do? What are the regulations, specifically here in Dubai and in other parts of the world? Go through a few of our different assistive listening solutions, and then talk briefly about the new solution we have, which is real-time captioning. So what is hearing loss? It's when you can't hear well, right? And a very important part of it is, so both of my parents actually have hearing loss, is you can see if you can't hear, if you can't understand what people are saying, it really limits your ability to interact with other people in society. If you don't have the proper support, there's no point in going to a cinema or going to a conference if you can't hear what's being said. So when you install an assistive listening system, you might do it because it's a regulation. You might do it because it's business for you. But if it's installed properly, it's actually something that really can help people. Hearing loss is increasing as humans get older. Most of us experience some degree of hearing loss as we get older. And it can also be noise induced. So if you're working in a noisy environment, if you're listening to headphones, if you go to concerts, there's a high degree of risk that you might get hearing loss at a higher age. So we talked about, welcome. So we talk about different degrees of hearing loss. So mild hearing loss means that you're losing about 26 to 40 dBs. Moderate is 41 to 65, and severe and profound hearing loss means you have a very hard time hearing without hearing aids or with some kind of support. So some statistics from around the world. Over 500 million people, and this number is actually a couple of years old, so it's probably more than that, but 7% of the hearing of the population in the world have hearing loss, and 360 million people have disabling hearing loss. It's a very common problem, and the difference with hearing loss compared to, for example, mobility, or if you are blind, it's very hard to see, right? You can't see on a person if they have hearing loss or not. So sometimes it's called a hidden disability, because there are so many people that never get a hearing aid and nobody knows that they have hearing loss. So if hard of hearing individuals was a country, it would be the third largest country in the world, so a lot of people. And as the average age in many countries is increasing, so is hearing loss. So actually about 40% of people over 65 years old have some degree of hearing loss. Any questions so far? No? Everyone is still awake? You got your coffee? You're good to go? Okay. There are a number of national and international advocacy groups that, try to help people who have hearing loss. So you probably have some familiarity with hearing aids. So there's all kinds of different types of hearing aids. I don't know, have any of you heard about induction loop systems? Yes, we do, very good. You get the gold star. So induction loop systems, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but what an induction loop system is, it transfers your house audio directly into a person's hearing aid if they have a T-coil in the hearing aid. So most of the behind-the-ear hearing aids, these guys have a T-coil, which means that you can pick up the signal, you just flip a switch, press a little button. However, it's becoming more and more popular with the in-the-ear hearing aids because they're more discreet, nobody sees it. But some of these hearing aids do not have a T-coil, which means even if you have a perfectly working loop system, you can't pick it up with a hearing aid. So just something to be aware of. Cochlear implants, you may or may not be familiar with that, but cochlear implants is for somebody who is all completely deaf or almost completely deaf. So there's now a technology where you can have a permanent device attached to your skull to be able to hear again. And the cochlear implants do have T-coils in them. So if you have a cochlear implant, if you're in a space with a induction loop system, you're able to pick up the signal. So why are assistive listening systems needed, right? It's if I have a hearing aid, I will hear better, the sound will be louder. Now, and hearing aids are getting smarter, but the problem is, say you're in a church, your big conference center, or say you're in an airport. I mean, we all know how hard it is, despite the efforts of you guys to hear announcements in an airport. The problem is the hearing aid, it's very difficult to know what comes out of the speaker and, what's someone next to me coughing and, what's scratching with chairs or something. So the problem is you basically get all the sounds amplified, which means it's not really easier to hear necessarily, especially if there's a lot of reverberation. So what an assistive listening system does, and this is true for all of our technologies, whether it's infrared, induction loop, the whole idea is to transfer from the microphone or the speaker or from the music of the band the sound you want to hear directly into your hearing aid, right? So you get the right sound amplified into your ears. There is global disability legislation all over the world, and specifically in Dubai, since 2017, the Dubai Universal Design Code has really clarified what's needed here. So I have highlighted around some of the key topics here. So a hearing enhancement system such as an induction loop, FM, or infrared is required in meeting rooms, auditoriums, service counters, theaters, and concert halls. So do any of you guys work with any of this kind of venues? Probably, right? Yeah, so there's probably a lot of projects where you're, supplying speakers, maybe some beautiful Shure microphones, whatever it might be, where there should also be an assistive listening system. So specifically, it says in all meeting rooms of over 25 people, in all assembly areas, and at service counters, a hearing enhancement system shall be provided. So it's pretty clear in the guidelines here what is needed. So we also have some newer technologies. For example, now we have audio via Wi-Fi systems for assistive listening. So that is not mentioned specifically in the Universal Design Code. However, there is a provision that other technologies can be used as long as they result in substantially equivalent or greater accessibility and usability. So if you have a Wi-Fi system where you're able to provide some receivers, you're able to have people pick up the signal with their mobile phones, that should be allowed under the code as well. Any questions so far? No?
Is this a mandated legislation or is that a fine suggestion?
I believe it is mandated, but maybe the team from NMK can advise a little bit. Yeah.
How far can we drive that point?
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly if there are fines applied, how it's being kept after, but we can research that a bit more. But I think it's interesting. So I've been with Williams for 6 years, and I think specifically in Dubai and UAE, we're seeing a lot more interest and business from the assistive listening side, and I think a lot of that is driven by legislation. And actually, Dubai is kind of in the forefront worldwide right now, as there's a discussion about people of determination, what they now are calling people with disabilities. So it's really a pretty big change over the last few years. So, okay, so now you know that, yes, we should have some assistive listening solutions. Now the question is, what kind of technology do you want to use? I'm a little bit biased, but I think you should use something from WilliamsAV, so that's a good starting point. The key is that one size doesn't really fit all, right? So we have all kinds of different venues. We talked about service counters where you really just need a solution for 1 meter. We have giant conference halls. So the size matters. Aesthetics matters. So, depending on the room, in a room like this, it's probably no big deal to have a couple of infrared emitters, but you have a highly historical place. It might be an old church, an old mosque, an old theater. It might be very sensitive what the architects want to put in the room. Construction material, is there some other equipment that might, for example, interfere? For example, for induction loop, mostly, in most places, you can install it, no problem at all. But we had one situation, actually, we're based in the state of Minnesota, and we put in an induction loop for the state legislature. And everything was working fine. And then about a month later, we got the call saying, it sounds horrible. One of the senators had a hearing aid, and he said, oh, I can't hear anything. There's so much static. And it turns out there was like a big power station right next to to the room where the hearing loop was installed, which hadn't been active when we installed the loop. Then they turned it on, and it was just horrible. So not a very usual situation, but something that you might have to consider. Organizations, you guys all deal with all kinds of companies, government entities. Some people care a lot about security, others not as much. I'm sure here in Dubai too, there are some people who don't want to pay a lot of money, and some people have a bigger budget, right? Technical aptitude. Some organizations just want something that works right away, that's completely, easy to use, whereas other organizations are more interested in having like the state-of-the-art technology and something that's more technically advanced. And finally, the users, right? So the people who are actually going to use the system. So, for example, if you're installing something in a university, you typically have young people. They use their cell phones all the time. If you're installing a system in a senior living place, you have a very different type of user, right? You have someone potentially who might not be as comfortable with technology, who just wants something to work right away. So what does this all mean? This means that the different technologies all have their pros and cons. I won't go into this in too much detail because I have another slide, but you can see depending on what you want to do, there's a lot of things to consider. So the point for Williams is we don't say, okay, you need to use an FM system or you need to use an induction loop system. What we're trying to do is to have a range of technologies, just because depending on your situation, one technology may be working better than another. So induction loop is very good for someone who has a hearing aid with a T-coil if it's properly installed. So the big benefit with induction loop is that you get the signal directly to the hearing aid. You don't need to go and borrow another device to get the signal. Infrared is another technology that's very popular, especially in the UK and in Australia. Most of the assistive listening is done with either induction loop or infrared. One thing that's very helpful with infrared is the transmission is done via infrared light, which means light can't go through walls, right? Infrared lights cannot go through walls either. So if you have a room like this, this is obviously top secret information. Nobody can stand outside and listen and have an infrared receiver and hear what I'm saying. So it's a very kind of foolproof way to make sure you have a secure transmission. So you don't need to have any fancy codes. You don't need to do any fancy programming. You just need a wall, and the signal can't escape from the room. Wi-Fi is a little bit of a newer technology. It's been around probably for 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. And this is, I talked about universities before. That's one of the venues where we installed a lot of Wi-Fi systems, because the idea with the Wi-Fi is you download an app, you receive the audio on your own phone. So maybe in a senior living place, it's not the perfect technology, but in a university where everybody's using their phones all day, it's a very good technology for that. And it's easy for people to use, and it's a natural and discreet way to interact. You can just use your own earbuds that you use every day for other technologies. Finally, or not finally, almost finally, FM is is actually what we got started with as a company. So we've had FM system for over 40 years now. It's, for an installation perspective, it's very easy to install. You basically put your transmitter in a corner, connect audio. There, in most cases, you can have an included antenna, and you have a very long range. So from our FM systems that we offer here in Dubai and UAE, you have a range of about 300-meter radius. So you can cover potentially a whole stadium just using one transmitter. And finally, we have our Digi-Wave systems. These are our small portable systems. So we use them for assistive listening in situations where, for example, some corporate spaces where you want to be able to move the system from room to room, or the same in schools. We've also seen this system installed in situations where you also need a secure transmission, because this is an encrypted technology. You can pin code protect it. So I don't know if any of you followed the trial involving George Floyd, but that happened in Minneapolis where we have our office. But that's an example of that kind of situation where you need very secure technology. That's another situation where Digi-Wave gets installed. Okay. So unless you guys have any questions right now, what I'll do now is spend a few minutes on each of the technologies and go into them a little bit deeper. You know, this is not installer training, so you know, if you have any further questions, please let the NMK team know where we can go deeper. But this should at least give you an idea of what the situation is with each of the technologies. So if we talk about induction loop, this is a technology that has been around since the 1930s. It's almost 100 years old, right? There are a lot of loop systems around. So Williams is a member of the IHLMA. Anybody know what that stands for? You get a free cookie with lunch if you know. It's the induction here in loop International Here in Loop Manufacturers Association. I don't get a free cookie because I got it wrong. Anyways, they have estimated, so that's us, that's Ampetronic, that's the major loop manufacturers in the world. So we did a secret poll a couple of years ago and said, how many systems have you installed, Williams? And when we added them up, we figured out there were about 5 million loop systems around the world. So from time to time, there's some discussion about, you know, there's newer technology coming, Wi-Fi is coming, maybe in the next few years, there might be Bluetooth technology coming. But I think the consensus in the industry is when there are so many systems installed, it will take some time before there's a change. So it's very old, right? Our system does not look like this. So there has been quite a bit of technology developments over the last 5-10 years. So Williams was actually the first manufacturer to introduce all three things you see here. So DSP processing with the audio industry, you know, that's something that should be present. And what DSP processing means in an induction loop system, why do you need it? Well, depending on the environmental situations, there can be loss of certain frequencies. So if you have DSP processing rather than just a manual knob on the amplifier, you have the ability to really fine-tune it to make sure you get a nice even signal across the different frequencies. Network control, that is quite helpful for commissioning. You can do remote monitoring. As long as you can reach the amplifier, you can see what's going on, even if you might have an installation in Riyadh and you're sitting in Dubai, for example. Digital inputs, so we were the first to introduce Dante inputs. You will see we have Dante capability for quite a few of our items now, which was kind of a bet we took, I think it was about 6-7 years ago, and fortunately it's really become an industry standard, as you guys know. So some considerations. What's good about loops? For a user, if my hearing aid has a T-call, remember most hearing aids today have T-calls, but not all of them. But if I have a hearing aid with a T-call, it's very convenient. I go into the room, all I have to do is to switch the little button on my hearing aid, and I get the audio directly into my hearing aid. So I don't need to borrow a receiver, it's convenient, it's sanitary, it's discreet, I don't have to go up to a counter and borrow a device. And it's kind of interesting because we actually have one of the best ranges when it comes to frequency, but it's still not a 20 to 20 range. However, if you have hearing loss, you probably cannot hear 20 kilohertz anyways. But what it does, an induction loop system, is it brings the audio into your ear. Your hearing aids are adjusted according to your specific hearing loss, which means for you, as a person with hearing loss, this gives you possibly the best sound experience you can have because it connects with your hearing aid that's suggested for your hearing. Some things to consider about the induction loop. I mentioned FM systems before, where you take an output from your DSP, plug it in, there's a built-in antenna, you turn the device on, and you're done. For induction loop, for those of you who are familiar with it, this example here is, just a drawing to show the principle. So you have wire around the room, it connects to your hearing aid to the T-call, who then transfers audio to sound waves. Now, in a bigger room, in a room like this, if you want any privacy, what you want to do is to install your wire in a more complicated pattern. So you will have maybe, 1.5 meters distance. You will have a pattern across the room, which means that your installation time, you have to install it usually under carpets. You need to coordinate that. You need to spend some time installing it. You need to commission it to make sure you have a nice, even signal across the different frequencies. So not just anybody can do it. It takes a little bit of training. It takes a little bit of expense and planning to properly install a loop system. So there is about every few years, there's a big international hearing conference. So at the last one in Berlin a few years ago, a person who's hard of hearing, who runs an assistive listening company in Sweden, actually did a speech. And I would say probably Sweden is up there with the UK, where there are a lot of loop systems. There's a good understanding of loop systems. But what he said is about 25% of the loop systems were properly installed. So what that means is in 3/4 of the spaces he went, they said they had a loop system. He turns on his T-call and either he can't hear anything at all or it sounds horrible. I mean, imagine that if you came to this training and this was black, right? Or, was all gray and it wasn't clear. So, which means, you know, somebody, an integrator, has spent time installing it, the venue has paid money for it, and it does no good. So loop systems are good as long as they're working well. We do as WilliamsAV, and you can coordinate this with LMK. If you do want to install a loop system, contact your account manager. They will get the information to us as long as you send us a CAD file or PDF or whatever. We will do a layout like that, and then we can do a simulation so you can see and you can show your client even before the project starts that this is a plan, this is how the system works, and you can have a nice installation. Any questions on induction loop systems? Not so far. I know a few of you guys work with induction loop systems already, and for some of you it's probably new. So I'm going to try and kind of try and catch the range. So what we offer for induction loop is really a range. So counter loops is for ticket counters, places like that. This little device, we have some systems which come with a loop mat. So you just install this mat under the counter. You connect it to the amplifier. We have a little shotgun mic, and that's your complete system. It just creates a magnetic field that's about 1 meter, and that's on purpose, right? If you're standing in the pharmacy counter or something, you don't want somebody, you know, on the other side of the room to be able to hear exactly what kind of medicine you're picking up. So that's the counter loop. For the other systems, we have 3 different sizes of amplifier from 9.5 amps to 12 amps, depending on your space. For all the guys on team. So we also provide all the accessories. So we have different kind of loop wires. So this is actually the flat copper wire that gets installed in the room. We have a field strength meter for commissioning, and then we have loop receivers. So for anybody who's hard of hearing, but maybe their hearing aid doesn't have a T-call, maybe they don't have a hearing aid, then we can provide a receiver for them to borrow so that they can still hear the system okay. Okay, so that's induction loop. You guys know everything about induction loop now. Good question. Yes, I didn't mention that as a downside. If you just lay out the perimeter loop around the room, you will have a lot of overspill of the signal. So if I lay the loop around the room here, kind of like how they put the Cat5 cable there, we could probably have overspill of 20, 30 meters, which means that the people in the next room could hear what we're saying. With the phased array, with the design where you go back and forth across the room, you can tighten that a lot. So you have limited overspill. However, if somebody is standing right outside the door, say for a courtroom or something, they could definitely hear what's going on inside already. So there are ways to design around so you keep the signal in the room, but it's not really a completely foolproof system. So that's a very good question, because that's one of the benefits with infrared is the thing with infrared is it's used in general applications all over the world. It's a fairly easy system to install. You put an infrared transmitter somewhere on the ball, and you see our newest transmitters are pretty small and discreet. But where it's especially helpful if you have a secure situation. So in the US, Specifically, we install a lot of infrared in courtrooms and cinemas, right? So courtrooms, sometimes they're closed hearings. They need to be discreet, and it's pretty foolproof. It just cannot go through a wall. That's not physically possible. So it's very helpful for that. So infrared has also been around for a long time. We've worked with infrared for, I think, about 35 years, and others have too. There's been a lot of technology development. So this is one of our radiators here. It's called the IRE4, and this will easily cover this room alone, probably in 2 channels also. But if you look at our previous generations, there's some big brands out there who are very good at microphones, for example, who also have infrared, but it's not their core technology, right? So you will see some radiators who are about this size. They weigh like 30 kilos, but their coverage area is probably the same about this. How is that possible? It's because we are so incredibly smart. Yeah, but it's also that, the technology has evolved, right? It's like everything, computers, phones, everything's getting smaller. So over the last few years, there are more efficient infrared LEDs. So for this one, for example, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We have 24 IR LEDs. And I don't know if you go up during the break or something. Yeah, it's active now. So if you're close, you can see little red dots. Yeah, yep. Yeah, no, so it's barely visible here, but for the camera, you see it better. Yeah. But you see they're really small, right? Yeah.
What's the range of that? How far it can go?
This can go about 50, 60 meters. And the coverage area is 18,000 square feet, so about 1,600 square meters. So the previous generation had, I think, like 50 or 60 LEDs. The LEDs themselves were bigger, and it was the same coverage area.
Does it need to be on top of the shelf or something?
Ideally, it should be maybe up here, pretty close to the ceiling, and with a little bit of angle, yeah. Because right now, if I pump like this, yeah, exactly. So, actually, let's do this. Let's see if this works. Okay. Want to be a volunteer? See if you can hear. So hopefully you should be able to hear right there, right? Do you hear the signal? Yeah, you hear the beep? What about if you put it under the table? Do you still hear it? Yeah, so it is line of sight. However, there's reflection. It's pretty sensitive. You don't have a pocket in your here, but I can put it in my pocket and I can still hear it. Anybody else wants to try it?
Basically, this is the receiver.
This is the receiver, exactly, yeah. So you will see, as long as you're in the room, you can probably hear the signal pretty well. If you're feeling ambitious, you can go out through those doors, and I can pretty much guarantee you can't hear it anymore. You can hear it okay too? So?
Should be on channel 2 only, right?
Yeah, channel 1, I think, is the microphone. See if you hear me if I speak like this on channel 1. Yeah. Yeah? Yeah, it's clear? Yeah. So if it was a real install, I would not put these right here, because if I sit like this, that's not going to be good. I have a second one, so you probably still hear me, but ideally you want to put it kind of pointing so it covers as much as the room as possible. So for this unit here, the IR Plus, we can connect 4 emitters to it directly. If you have a bigger space, we also have what we call an array unit, which is really like a splitter. So you can split the signal 4 ways. So 4 times 4, 16 emitters, which covers something like 25,000 square meters. So when we introduced this system, I said, you know, anyone who sells the system with 16 emitters, you're going to get the special price, because I thought nobody would ever do it. But we just sold our first like maximum system with 16 emitters to a school in Australia. So now I have to give away a car. Yeah, if anybody else wants to try it, let these guys know. We do have, if you want to, and you can try it later too. I will have the signal going. If you want to, I do have covers for the earphones too. Yeah, you can change the covers if you'd like. So one of the things with these receivers is that the photo detectors in the receivers are quite sensitive. So that's why you're kind of able to hear it, even if you have it under the table a little bit, something like that. So that is quite helpful. Also, if you see the material of the receiver, it's actually all a special material that lets in the infrared light. So, you know, it looks black, but it's actually, for the infrared light, it's transparent. So even if you, I mean, ideally, I want to have it around my neck like this, but even if you switch it, you turn it upside down, the photo detector is here inside, and this whole material is infrared transparent. So it doesn't really matter which side is in and out. Ease modeling, to be honest, for most installations, since the coverage area of our standard transmitter is pretty big, like for a room like this, there's no need to do an ease simulation, because I can basically put one of these anywhere in this room and you will cover the whole room. But if you have a bigger space, you know, where you might need several emitters, what you can do is talk to NMK, let them know what the space is, and they can coordinate with our Tech Blue team, and we can do a simulation to see, okay, for this space, you will need 4 emitters. Let's put them here, 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 and here to get the most coverage. So in this example, you know, we have 1 emitter here and 1 emitter here, and you can see there's not really a lot of coverage behind, but it covers all of this space. Okay, so we talked about a lot of this already, how the signal stays in the room. I mentioned cinemas before. So a lot of cinemas have also audio description for the blind. And I can imagine here in Dubai, as the awareness of people of determination or people with different challenges increases, that there might be more of a requirement for that. So the good thing for infrared is we can do up to 4 channels if you need assistive listening. Plus, you know, for example, audio description for the blind, you can do that with the same system. I mentioned courtrooms before. So in courtrooms, a lot of times, especially in the US, we have assistive listening for anybody who needs that. But a lot of times there's a translated language. So there are a lot of Spanish speakers, for example, in the States. So if anybody needs an interpreter, they can use the same system. It's fairly low cost, existing spaces. So for Induction Loop, you really mostly want to put it under a carpet. So if we wanted to install an induction loop in this room, we had to coordinate with the hotel and say, hey, do you guys need a new carpet? Are you okay pulling it up? If you have a cement floor, you really need to bury the cable in the floor. So, you know, if you have a new project, you can coordinate all of that. If you want to do a refit, like for example, and I don't remember the exact details, but the Dubai Universal Design Code calls for, if there's significant renovations, you should install an assistive listening system if it's not present. So the good thing with infrared is you don't have to do too much structurally. You can put up an IR transmitter, and that way you can cover the need. Keep in mind, line of sight required, emitters must be mounted in a room, right? So if, for example, my AV rack is in a small AV room, IT room, off there, I can't put the emitter there. It's not going to work. So, you know, that's one limitation. You got to put it here. There are certain situations where you have an architect with really firm vision, which don't want any disturbances, where, you know, that might be a challenge. Line of sight is required, but again, there are reflections. Actually, in this room, there's one thing that helps for the signal, and it's one thing that hurts for the signal. Anybody have any guesses? It's kind of like general acoustics. What creates echoes? So we have pretty, yep. So we have pretty hard white walls here, right? So that's actually really good for the infrared system. So thank you, thank you the hotel for helping my demonstrations. But they also have something bad, and that's the curtains in the back. So they kind of absorb the signal. Yeah. Outdoors, you cannot use it outdoors. We had actually a distributor, and I'm not sure why they did it, in the Netherlands who tried it, and they said, you know, with this emitter that should go about 50 meters, they could go about 5 meters.
It won't affect by some signal, they jump the signal.
Yeah, well, the biggest interference is that big yellow thing in the sky. It's the sunlight, yeah. So that's why it really does not work outdoors. As far as other interfering equipment, microwaves, yes, that could interfere. Yep, yeah, cell size possibly. Wi-Fi stuff like that is not the problem. The old plasma screens, remember like how plasma screens were popular before the LEDs came? That's a problem. But fortunately, you know, I mean, you see this is right by the screen and there's no problem. And like the first generation of fluorescent lights, sometimes there was an issue, but we actually changed our frequency to deal with that. So that's really not an issue anymore. We also see, even when there are large windows, most windows block out enough of the infrared frequencies that it's really not a problem. So I mentioned this super big project, right, with the 16 emitters. What it actually is a space that's kind of a meeting space, but it's an open area, and they have windows all across the wall, and it's still fine. So these are different solutions we have. We have, depending on your area, different transmitters that have the inputs, audio inputs right in the back. They sit in the room, so it's kind of an all-in-one solution, the IR-T1, T2, and TX90. Then we have this solution that's called the IR-M1, and this is the one where we can connect several different emitters to the same device. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. For the receivers, we have the body pack receivers, and we also have stetoset receivers. So mostly we sell body pack receivers, but do you guys have any idea when you might want to use these receivers? I'll do a demonstration. Yeah, could be one, right, exactly. If you have a headdress, something like that, yep, that's definitely one. What we see in the US, and I'm not sure what the regulations are locally here, is I could strangle somebody with this cord, but it's very hard to kill somebody with this. I haven't tried, but I think it's very hard. So actually in court systems and in jails, often they say you can't have anything with a cable. So that's one reason to use these devices, and it's also an all-in-one device. Also, one of our key competitors mostly have the stetoset devices, so that's another reason sometimes they get spec'd in. But it's really a preference, yeah. For our previous generation, and actually for most of the manufacturers, because you have a more limited space that you can work with, the reception and the coverage range was quite a bit less. This newest model came out about a year and a half ago, and it doesn't quite have the same range as this, but very similar. So here's a comparison of our different solutions. So the IR Plus system has a number of advantages. It's the only one on the market with a Dante option. We have the network controls. Again, you can sit here in Dubai and look at the system that is installed in Saudi Arabia or wherever it might be. We also have Wi-Fi dual technology. I'll talk about that in a minute. And a distributed array, which is where I can connect a bunch of different emitters to the same device. So IR Plus. What does plus stand for? It's IR plus Wavecast. We didn't want to call it IR plus Wavecast because that's kind of long, so we just call it IR plus. Why do we have two different technologies in the same box? It's the main point is really to increase accessibility. So I was talking about, for some people, maybe younger, maybe more tech savvy, it's great to be able to receive the signal on my phone. For somebody like my mother, who's 85 years old, she doesn't even have a smartphone. The best thing for her is, okay, I'm going to the theater. Oh, I borrow one of these. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'm on channel 1. You put it on, they turn it on for you as you borrow it. It's super easy, right? So the idea is, I think, for us in the room, maybe most of us would just download the app, listen to it. But, if you think about the people who actually need the technology, that's not necessarily the best solution for them. So infrared, easy to use, no need to have a smartphone. Wi-Fi, discreet, right? I have my earbuds in my ears all the time anyways. I can use my own smartphone. Don't need to worry about something else. Yeah, exactly. I got this in my pocket already. Yeah, just application. You just download the application and you're good to go. Yep, exactly. That's it. Yeah, very straightforward. We have a web interface, so let's see. So this is what the web interface looks like. So unfortunately, this isn't live now because I'm on another network, but you can see we have VU meters. You can name your different channel for the Wi-Fi portion. And you can.
There's also diagnostic.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see exactly. If you go to status here, you can see is it temp okay, power status, is it online? So I have two emitters right here, and you can see that they're both online right now. And you can, again, you could sit here, you could look at system in Sharjah or Oman, wherever it is, and you can actually see the live VU meter. So you know that, oh, audio is coming in, it all looks okay. Yep. For the Wi-Fi portion, you can upload an image, you can have a background image, things like that. You also have different presets, so you can do a voice, music, hearing assist preset, or you can do a custom preset as you see is appropriate. Let's see. Okay. And by the way, the web GUI looks very similar for several of our devices. So if you're kind of using several different devices, they will look pretty similar. So we did a little bit of the demo already. The other device we have available is, of course, remember that this is dual technology. So if we look at the back here, and you guys can come up and look when we have a break maybe, is we have some outputs with the Cat5 cable to the emitters. And then this output here is a red cable. I had to have a different color, otherwise I would screw it up. And I didn't screw it up this time, which is good, is for a Wi-Fi system. So right now I just have a freestanding access point, but in general, you would typically connect it to your house Wi-Fi system. Just double check. Does anybody want to listen to it? So what we also have, which doesn't apply so much to the combo system, but we also have, you know, a freestanding Wi-Fi system. Now, the challenge with bring your own device systems is if you don't have a device, or I don't have any memory, so I can't download the app, or my device, I don't have the battery charge. So we do have, this is a Wi-Fi receiver. So it's basically like it's a dumb smartphone, if you will. All it is, it's it's like a phone. It works with Wi-Fi, but all it does is really just has one app downloaded. So it has the Wavecast app already. Whatever you have as channels, there's two different channels right here, is working with this device. Okay, so we talked about the IR Plus, which has the IR plus Wavecast Wi-Fi. The other device we have, we don't have it with us here today, but it's the FM Plus. So can anyone guess what technology is in the FM Plus? Malia, you want to guess? What's that? Yeah, yep. So the FM Plus works with FM plus Wi-Fi, and we have an analog version as well as a Dante version as well. So the idea is very similar to the IR, right? So for the IR, You have the option of using the IR receiver or the Wi-Fi receiver or your own phone. For the FM, you have a very similar option. You can use an FM receiver, which looks very similar, or you can use your own phone, or you can use the Wi-Fi receiver. So the same idea that you have that flexibility. You know, the young university kids, they all want to use their phones. The 85-year-olds, maybe they prefer to go and borrow an FM receiver. It's nice and easy, right? Let's go to the right one here. So for our FM products, this is the FM Plus here. So we actually decided with our standard rack-mounted FM transmitter, it always comes with a Wi-Fi option. And usually for the FM, people aren't too concerned about security because FM really doesn't have any security. We were talking about Induction Loop, how you can kind of contain it in a room with some smart design. For an FM, we can limit how far the signal goes. You have the option of high, low, medium, but there's no sign-in, there's no pin codes, nothing like that. If you're within the range, you can pick up the signal. We have kind of a cheaper version, which we call the T27, and we also have a body pack for the receiver. For a transmitter, so this is for your Tourguide solutions. For the receiver, we have 3 different options. We have the R37, which usually is used for assistive listening. You guys, the integrator, will program it, and you just keep it on one channel. We also have the one with an LED display, where you can select your channel that way. You select your volume, everything. So when we introduced this, we took away the option with the rotary knob. However, based on popular demand, we got it back. So that's usually used for interpretation. We can do up to 8 channels with FM, and you just choose the channels with that. For the chargers, we have a 2-bay charger, and this is the same, whether you use infrared receivers, loop receivers, or FM receiver. They all have the same form factor, or we have a 12-bay charger. For the antennas, it comes with a antenna included that just goes on the top of the unit, or depending on your design, if it's in a rack, you might want to have one of these foldable antennas, right? That goes in the back of the rack. You can run this up a space. Again, this is something we can help you with. We have an antenna selection guide available on our website, or our tech team can help you. So some of the features, again, easy install, pretty low cost, Wi-Fi servers, you have the dual technologies. We do have 17 channels available. However, they're pretty close to each other. So we only have 8 non-overlapping channels. So the question I get sometimes is, well, if you can really only use 8 channels, why do you have the 17 channels? And the reason for that is if there is some radio interference on, say, one of the non-overlapping channels, you might want to switch it slightly. Unlimited receiver is like a radio station, right? If I'm a radio station, anyone can connect to it. It doesn't make a difference. The range is really big. It's about 300-meter radius. So if you look both ways, 300 times 2 is 600 meters. So you have 600 meters of coverage for a diameter. Battery life, that's one of the things with our receivers. And this is very similar with the infrared receiver too, is our battery life is about 50 hours with alkaline batteries. If you use the rechargeable batteries and the charger, it's about 32 hours. So you can use the receivers for several days. If you forget to put them in the charger overnight, you can forget at least 2 or 3 days before you're screwed. Any questions around FM? No? So far, so good. Okay, so the other technology I want to talk about is Digi-Wave. So these items, and we'll go into these in a little bit more detail, talking about Tourguide and Intercom. But the idea behind Digi-Wave, it's a small portable device. I can move it from classroom to classroom, things like that. We also have them in certain fixed installations. So we had them in courtrooms, for example. It is a frequency hopping technology. You can use the PIN code, so there's a pretty high degree of security with these devices. Here's the range of devices. So we have Transceiver. This is a two-way device. And we have 2 versions of the receivers. One that can be recharged and one that takes alkaline batteries. Sorry, and we have different chargers, headset, carry cases, so a whole range of accessories. This thing here is pretty important, the Digi-Wave Connect. So what that is, it's basically an I/O box. It's probably not the most fancy and advanced system we've ever designed, but it's really helpful, right? So this really takes this from being a portable system to being a fixed install. So it comes with a mounting bracket for the transceiver. You get power and audio through here, so you can put in your house audio here. You connect it to the transceiver, and now you have a wireless system. So the range of this is about 120 meters. So certainly for a room like this, for a decent sized space, this would work just fine. For a stadium, it might not be ideal. And here you have the receiver options. So in certain countries, radio licenses can be a problem. Digi-Wave works on 2.4 gigahertz, so it's a license-free technology. So if that ever becomes an issue, this can be an alternative to the FM systems. The other thing that's pretty neat is using this as a portable solution. So for example, we have a school, we have students who is hard of hearing. You know, maybe in an ideal situation, you would have an installed hard of hearing system in every classroom. That doesn't always happen. Maybe there's not the budget, whatever. So the other alternative is for the student to be assigned a receiver, and then he can have his little kit and go from classroom to classroom, and the teacher can use the transceiver and the student can use the receiver. And the good thing with this is because it's a two-way system, you have the ability to have several speakers. So this is from one of the projects we had, is we had a teacher with a transceiver, lapel mic microphone, and then we had 3 different tables with students with a table microphone, and then we had the receiver for the students. So just give me 5 more minutes and then we'll have a little break. So Wavecast we spoke quite a bit about, but going into audio via Wi-Fi a little bit more, the main benefit is BYOD. You don't have to have other receivers. The problem is not everyone has a smartphone. In most of the standards, there's a requirement that it's universal design, right? Everybody should be able to access it. You shouldn't be required to have a specific device. well, we have the Wi-Fi receiver, so that's the solution for that situation. You can use your existing network infrastructure. If you do have a complex network, something like a university, there are certain things you need to think about. Well, we have some design support. We have some special tools to make sure that you get the good experience. So new modern technology. One question we get is about latency. So audio via Wi-Fi has a little bit more latency than something like infrared, right? Infrared basically travels with the speed of light, which is pretty hard to beat. So our system has a minimum latency of about 40 milliseconds. So if we're doing a one-on-one, I'm standing here, you're sitting here, and you're trying to read my lips, it's probably a little bit annoying. Now, if you look at broadcast standards, I think mostly they're about, I think it's 150 millisecond latency. So if you're in a decent sized room, your brain can work with the latency of the system if it is set up properly. So we have some different options for the Wavecast. We have the 1-channel system and the 8-channel system. And the 8-channel system can be combined, 8 of them, so we can do a maximum of 64 channels. We have the receiver, we have some protective skins, and we have chargers for the receivers as well. So for the Wavecast, in addition to assistive listening and interpretation, it's also being used in places like sports bar, anywhere where you have a lot of different TV screens, and a range of other applications like we did the Qatar National Library, for example, in Qatar, which is like a big museum with a lot of different displays, or sports commentary, and even silent discos. So I think with that, maybe we can do a little break. If somebody is interested in, what do we have? Coffee? Yeah. Okay, yeah, so please take a little break, and yeah, let's get back here 10 minutes. Yes, about 11:35. And if you're listening via Teams, please have a break. Hopefully you can get some coffee, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Sure, yeah.
We have a project which is
Okay.
now another issue that I'll
I think, yeah, you know, do 5, 7, 10. Like 50 centimeters, but 5 centimeters.
still try to. I think, of course, like you cannot make it any much above that because from a production perspective. The other question was, I think this is going to be an issue which was not thought of, is that these are discriminatory, so that means they're having that means is that I think it may not be effective as well.
Yeah, I think like the metal in the States, yes, they will have, but maybe not the challenge here. The challenge is, you know,
See, even the floors, I think they have complete.
yeah, I mean, they've been there'll be some interference, but if you're on the lowest level, you should still be okay. The problem is if you're like levels up, now your ear is what probably down, whatever is going to
Probably.
right, yeah.
I would
And
say at least 3 meters.
yeah, your signal up here. So honestly, we just actually like 2 weeks ago, we had a request for what we could,
Combination. Okay.
yeah, or maybe a combination system. Because then, if it's not too big, you probably just have one IoT and you can cover the space, or depending on how big it is, but it might not have to be DJs like us, but that way you're having a good signal even if you're on. I think that's going to be your, if you're on the lower level like this, yeah, you have some, you should be okay, but highest level in your signal is going to, so really installing standards, I have signals like,
I think then that will need a little bit of information onto.
yeah,
We have not received the details of how that retract,
yeah.
but we have done another that same thing, so that it goes quite a bit years, especially the last 3 or 4.
Yeah, and if we have like fixed seating, what we do a lot is we actually run the cable with the steps.
If it's fixed seating, it's okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
like,
but
this
you
is,
know, with the retractable, yeah,
It's
you
just
can
an
maybe have a run, but it's, yeah, it's really a pain. And
I think it wasn't okay. I know it's ultimately it was not designed by us. There was a consultant involved.
yeah,
But now that we have come to the execution stage, we just want to make sure that before they approve it, that we'll highlight this.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. In fact, I think my colleague who stepped out, he went for the exact same, for a meeting regarding
yeah,
this actually.
yeah.
So
Okay.
I'll give him a heads up.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
Thanks.
Sure, yeah, no problem.
I've been speaking all morning.
I know, I know.
That was the effect.
I might be live still. I'm gonna do this. How many minutes did you say? Sure, yeah. Please, yep, as long as you give your email address, we'll get it sent out. Okay, so we're gonna get started here in just 1 minute. Let me just see if anyone else is coming in. Okay. Okay, let's start. So, I have some bad news and some good news for you guys. So there's 3 parts of the presentation, right? We have 2 parts left. That's the bad news. The good news is we're over halfway. So the other parts are a bit shorter. So hopefully you all got coffee, you got the snack, you can stay awake for another 1 hour, 15 minutes. After that, I don't care. You can go take a nap, take the rest of the day off. But please stay awake for another hour. So I'd like to speak a little bit about our Intercom and Tourguide solutions and what we do around that. So usually these are 3 different modules. You are getting a benefit because you don't have to hear the overview 3 times. That would be kind of annoying. So I really just have 2 parts in this presentation. So it's Digi-Wave, which is this device, which we can use for both Intercom and Tourguide. This is a 2-way device. And then I'll speak a little bit about our FM devices, which are 1-way, specifically for Tourguide. So this little device is quite flexible. For those of you who were here from the beginning of the day, you will hopefully remember that I talked about that this can be used for assistive listening. Now it can also be used for Intercom and Tourguide, which is really one of the main purposes, as well as interpretation, which I will talk about at the final part of the training today. So we saw this slide already. We have the Transceiver, which is a 2-way device. If you need to have 2-way communication between multiple people, they all need the 2-way transceiver device. We also have 2 versions of the receiver. So there's a couple of ways you can see the difference between the transceiver and the receiver. So this one is silver, this is black in the back, and the transceiver has a talk button. Yep, and the receiver doesn't have a talk button because you can't talk, right? This is listen only. Yeah, and it's it's kind of funny. We have a system with Saudi Aramco, and what they decided to do is they have transceivers for some of the people going on the tours having a discussion, but the people who aren't as important, they only get the receiver. So they can listen, but they can't talk back and ask any questions. So this receiver is rechargeable. You can see there's charging contacts. It's the same for the transceiver and receiver. So they go in a drop-in charger. There's also USB-C. So if you have just one device, you can also, the transceiver comes with a power supply, so you can charge it as a single unit as well. We also have what we call the DLR 400 ALK. So actually I should tell you what all these devices are called. This is the DLT. It stands for the D is for digital. and the D and the L, and the T stands for transceiver. This is a DLR, digital receiver. 400 is the 4th generation, and this is RCH for rechargeable. This one is ALK for alkaline. So the reason we have an alkaline receiver is there's really 2 reasons. One is for some of the event companies. They don't like to charge the devices. They prefer to just put in new batteries. And it's also a little bit cheaper. But the functionality is pretty similar. So these devices operate on 2.4 gigahertz, which means you can take it anywhere in the world and you don't need a license. We can have up to 6 full duplex talkers at the same time in the intercom mode. You can have more people connected. So for those of you who read ahead, we can actually have 1024 DLTs, transceivers, in the same group. Now the range is about 120 meters, so I don't know how you're going to fit 1024 people. And this one, we've never had an application where you need that many people. But the point is, you can have more people in a group. You know, you can have 10 people, 20 people. The only thing is you can only have 6 people pressing the talk button at the same time. And if you have 10 people trying to talk at the same time, you probably can't hear them anyways, right? So it's a frequency hopping technology. So it works on 2.4 gigahertz, but it's not Wi-Fi. So what it does, it hops 325 times per second, and it kind of hops around the different Wi-Fi frequencies. So with that, we kind of divide up the spectrum in 4 different parts. So that means if you're in the same space, like this room, we could have one group here, one group here, one group here, one group here, and they would be completely separated. They would never land on the same frequency. However, since they only stay on the same frequency for 1/3 of a second approximately, even if we have 4, 5, 6 groups, it will be so infrequent that you actually land on the same frequency and have an interference, you wouldn't even notice it. However, if we try to put 10, 11, 12 groups, now you're starting to get some interference. So ideally, you keep 4 groups, maybe 6 groups is safe. Above that, it's not recommended. So some of you guys did our last training a couple of years ago. Maybe you remember the trainer, Daryl, very tall guy, almost 2 meters. So him and our engineering manager did some range testing. So if they were standing like this on a field, we can get up to 270 meters. Realistically, if you're wearing the device, if you have some interference, some bodies in between, typically we get about 120 meter of a radius range. So this right here is your base station. So you don't have to have anything hardwired. If I program this as master, this is what everything syncs to. So wherever the master is, this is where our range is. The latency is about 7 to 10 milliseconds usually. We do have this device with some pretty secure installations. The US Army uses it, for example, for some of their field work. The United Nations use this device for some of the smaller conference room, places like that. They like it because we do have the encryption, 128 plus 87 bit, and you have the ability to put in a PIN code. Yep, you can use it for comms. You can use it for event setup, for example, so it has some flexible uses. And we actually have a few police department using it as well here in the GCC too. So it's again a fully portable wireless intercom. You don't need any base station. Whichever you program as a master is a base station. And you have quite a clear sound quality. So, you know, compared to walkie-talkie or something, it's a completely different experience. So we kind of hit a mid-range where sound quality-wise, we are much better than some of the low-end solutions or the solutions that are not fully duplex. But we don't have all the bells or whistles of a ClearCom system, for example, but we're at a different price level. So this is how it works. Like normally in an intercom system, you will have mostly transceivers, but you can also have receivers that are listen only. And I just noticed that this doesn't really make sense to have a headset with a receiver, so I better talk to our marketing people. So some of you have any of you guys used the other Digi-Wave system, the DLT 300 or the DLT 2.0? No? Nobody? Okay. So we have had 4 generations. The first generation came out about 10 years ago. We always gotten good feedback on the sound quality, how the system works. One thing, if you were familiar with the old system, was not that easy to program. So that's one of the big improvements we have made. And I'll unfortunately you probably can't see it very well, but I'll program a device here. So this is currently on Tourguide mode. So if I want to program, I hold the menu button. I get choice for a language. Right now we have English and Espanol. And I go to new settings. And let's do intercom. So the first option I get is between intercom, Tour, hearing assist, and interpretation. And actually from a functional status, some of these are very similar, like the intercom and Tour are basically the same, just like the presets are different. But the idea is if you're not familiar with the device, it should be natural. If you want to have a Tourguide system, what do you think you want to choose? Tour, right? It's pretty easy. You don't need you really don't need me training you to understand that, oh, I have a Tourguide system. Oh, I should probably choose Tour, right? So I click on, I'm going to change this to intercom. So I click on intercom. Then the next question is master or guest. So for every system, I just need, so I'll go a step back here. I don't know how good this camera is, but anyways, here are the different options, 4 different options in the first step. The next step is master or guest. For every system, you need 1 master. And this is what everything connects to radio-wise, as I mentioned. And the master also has some special powers. You guys want to know what the special powers are? So you can't fly, you don't get super strong if you're the master. Your special power is you can kick other people off. Like say you're doing like a factory tour and we have some annoying person that keeps asking questions, or maybe you're like in a critical area where you all need to concentrate, you can then decide that people can't talk back right now. So unfortunately, that's the only power the master has. There is also Master 2, which has similar power. The Master 2 is not required, but for example, if you're doing a presentation, you have 2 people, like here, maybe, Malaya or Abdul would be helping me. It might be good to have a Master 2. Next step is your group. If you have a separate Tourguide or intercom system, you just have one system, it really doesn't matter what the group number is. If you have several groups in the same area, you want to give them different group numbers. Then for the master, there are a couple of other options just to set the clock. And then it's advanced settings. Most of the time, you're going to say, no, I don't need to go into advanced settings, and you're done. So that took me, well, I had to explain it. If I didn't explain it, it would probably take me about 30 seconds to program a device. Now, if I want other devices in the same group, all I would have to do is to look up the group number, and then I just move with the arrows the device to the same group, and it automatically connects, and it inherits all of the settings. So this takes maybe 30 seconds. For all the rest of the devices, say you have 10 more devices, it probably takes 15 seconds each. So pretty easy to do the setup. What about if you have a secure situation, right? If you have, like we did a big project last year in Kuwait for the court system. We've done courts in many states in the US. So under advanced options, if you're concerned, you're like, well, this is a closed system. I don't want somebody to buy a DLT and come in and try and listen in. I can decide to disable the join group function. So that way I can't join unless I know the specific PIN code. So for the system, we have some pre-packaged systems. So if you go on our website, you go on a Digi-Wave, you look for system. We have options for 4, 6, and 8 transceivers. We have some different options with a headset. So this one is kind of our go-to basic version, but we have some more robust headsets as well. Now, what about if you want 10 transceivers? Are we going to say, sorry, you can't buy the system? No, the other option is, to buy systems a la carte as well. So we have the pre-packaged complete systems, or you can buy the different transceivers and receivers as you need. For the Tourguide applications, where we mostly see Digi-Wave is in loud environments. So we started as an assistive listening company. So you know what you need to do if you work with assistive listening. You need to make sure that you can make things loud, right? So there are international standards for the dBs you need to produce, and that is really helpful in noisy environments. So even though this might be used as a Tourguide system, we have places like Boeing, right? Like when they're doing airplane manufacturing, where they choose the Digi-Wave because you can make it loud enough to actually hear each other. With this being a two-way system, you have the possibility of doing Q&A, right? If you so choose. I'll talk a little bit about the interpretation as well. So it can be used for tourism, but a lot of time when it comes to Tourguide, it's really the factory tour where this is successful. The programming is really similar. So for intercom, I go to intercom. For tour, I go to tour. For the intercom, does anybody remember how many open mics we can have? Anybody want to search for lunch? 6, yeah, exactly. There you go. You get dessert. So for Tourguide, what we see most commonly is maybe you don't want as many people speaking on the same time. So the default is 4 open mics. But you can change that to 2 or 3 depending on what your setting is. Now, what about if you have a tour and you want 6 open mics? Well, under Tourguide mode, you can't have it. But remember, from a functional standpoint, both Tourguide and Intercom are two-way. The only reason we named them different was to make it easier. So if you need 6 open mics, you have to program it as an Intercom system. We also have some Tourguide systems in the box, depending on how many receivers you want. If you want the alkaline receivers, the rechargeable receivers, etc. Or you can build your own, right? So you can buy everything a la carte, and NMK is now stocking most of the components locally here in Dubai. Sorry, let me go back a sec. So you buy a transceiver, you buy 1 or more receivers, chargers, and then here you can see some examples of our headset options. Depending on what your noise level is, we also have mic only for presentations, table microphones, different headphones, carry cases, and very important silicone protective cases. Yeah. Some of our high-profile users, it's probably through the history of Williams Sound. I think we have a big history of assistive listening, but this is one of the most successful devices we've had, which is why we continue to develop them. So a lot of nice high-profile customers throughout the years. Any questions around the Digi-Wave system and how that works?
You can also use that in outer space.
Outer space? I don't know. We should try it. See if we can get it up on the space station. Yeah, we have. We've used it in some nuclear plants, for example, and we haven't had any explosions yet. So it might work. It might work. So the other system we have available for Tourguide is FM. So FM in general, we talked about assistive listening. We talked a little bit about interpretation, and the third option is Tourguide. So the benefit of using the FM system for Tourguide is, compared to the Digi-Wave system, the price level is a little bit lower because it's a one-way system instead of a two-way system. I mentioned the battery life before. It has really long battery life, up to 50 hours with alkaline and 32 hours with rechargeable batteries. And you can have up to 8 groups in the same area without interference. So I don't have it with me here today, but NMK actually do have these body pack transmitters in stock too. So we call that the PPA T46. Very sexy name. The T stands for transmitter. That's the only part of the name that makes sense. The range is about 45 meters, so a little bit less range, but usually if you're on a tour and you're more than 45 meters from your tour guide, why are you on the tour? So usually works okay. Antenna, you don't need a separate antenna. So what we actually do is we use your microphones. You saw some examples here, like we have a similar microphone like this over your head. We have lapel mics. That is your antenna. So the cord actually acts as an antenna. So if you want to use your own accessories, that might be possible, but you should really check with us first, because if your cable is too short or too long, that affects your radio signal. Okay, so that was a pretty quick overview of our Tourguide solutions. So See, I told you that wasn't going to be too painful. So the last part is it's hopefully exciting. I think it's exciting. Is our language solutions. So again, you get the free overview. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about how language, a couple of language facts, how interpretation works. And again, I know some of you are very familiar with interpretation, but some not as much. So hopefully I can try and hit both of those. Talk a little bit about our different interpretation solutions, and focusing a bit on Digi-Wave, which again is really a helpful product for interpretation. Talk a little bit about our interpreter console, and then we'll have a quick 5-minute break because I need to set up then for our AI-powered translation, which is one of our newest products. So there are approximately 7,139 languages spoken in the world today. The other benefit you guys get from coming here today, whether you're on Teams or in person, is these modules. All 3 modules are brand new, so we haven't actually developed the test yet. So you're going to pass the class without the test. So you don't need to remember how many languages there are in the world, because that would be on the test otherwise. So out of the 8 billion people in the world, I think everybody in here speaks English, obviously, or you'll have a very boring time right now. But there are 6.5 billion people in the world who don't speak English. And, you know, English is obviously the language of communication, but there are so many people who, you know, speak another language. And then if you think about English as a first language, 7.5 billion people don't speak English as a first language. So where's interpretation used? Any examples, you guys? Do you know where we use language interpretation in the world? Yep. UN, live conferences, press conference. Yes, I think that's what we mostly think about, right? So the big international organizations, the UN, NATO, International Monetary Fund, government, right? When the Prime Minister of Japan is meeting with the Queen of England, things like that. Events, you know, a lot of corporate events, places like that, but also in corporations. Like, for example, if you might be a company that's based in South Korea, but you have an office somewhere in the Middle East, for example, and some of the executives might be more comfortable speaking their own language. Courts, I mentioned that. If you have a defendant or a witness that are more comfortable speaking another language, schools and universities, we have a couple of systems installed in the regions for that. Hospitals, houses of worship. We have, for example, one of the main mosques in Qatar, we have one of our Wi-Fi systems installed so that people can listen and get interpretation into English and Urdu. So there's all kind of settings where interpretation is and can be helpful. There are some international organizations. So one question that come up a lot, and if you're a professional interpreter, they get sometimes, some of them a little bit annoyed when you say that they translate, because translation technically is mainly when you're converting from one language to another in writing, right? So you translate a book, you translate something like that. Consecutive interpretation is when somebody speaks first, I'm the presenter, and somebody might be interpreting into Hindi, for example, or in Japanese in this example. So I will speak, somebody will interpret, and then they will listen. The challenge with consecutive interpretation, and I know this for experience, is it takes twice as long, right? So if you have a 2-hour meeting, if you have to translate everything, it turns into a 4-hour meeting. So what's really helpful is simultaneous interpretation. So the easiest way to do simultaneous interpretation, this happens, for example, maybe in school conferences, for example, if you have some parents who don't understand the language, is an interpreter can literally sit next to somebody and just whisper in their ear. Now, for a big professional setting in the United Nations, you usually don't see that. And we don't like whisper interpretation because you don't need to buy any of our equipment. So there's a couple of options. Is you might have a portable situation. You might be out in the field, like the US Army in the forest somewhere. If the interpreter can hear the floor language directly, you could do it with FM or Digi-Wave. It's basically just a one-way stream. I'm an interpreter, I'm sitting here, I'm speaking, I'm sending out the audio stream wirelessly. The other situation is where you have a fixed situation. This might be church, for example. An interpreter might be sitting in the back and just speaking into one of our transmitters. So for portable Tourguide, if you used our FM product, if you use most of our competitors' FM product, you would have someone like, for example, the guy who's leading the tour. He might be the plant manager. He will speak, and the interpreter will have to have a receiver to receive this wirelessly, and then another transmitter to then send out on another channel. Now, one of the big inventions with Digi-Wave, with this device, with the DLT, that we've had from the beginning is you're able to handle 2 channels at once. So I have my headset. Say we're out on the factory floor, we're having the factory manager, he's speaking in English. I will listen, I will receive on this device channel 0, which is in English. I will hear that in my ear. If I program this in interpreter mode, I have the ability to choose which channel I send out my speech in. So I can say, okay, I want to be on channel 1. I speak, I listen to English, at the same time I speak in Spanish, and anyone needing to listen to Spanish, just program the receivers to listen to channel 1. So for programming, you go into the main menu, and you don't choose Intercom, you don't choose Tor, you don't choose Assistive Listening, you choose interpretation, and then it kind of walks you through the steps, whether you're an interpreter or you're the original floor language, whoever you are. So this is what we will see in a more official setting, right? We have the interpreter's booth. We have usually some kind of interpreter's console, whether it's our equipment or somebody else's. That's getting hardwired to one of our different transmitters. Could be Digi-Wave, infrared, FM, even our audio via Wi-Fi wavecast. And then you have some kind of receiver for the audience. And if you have several languages, you have the same setup for each of the languages. So some of the technology is, and I've mentioned this already, so if you're not familiar with interpretation, the presenter language is usually called the floor language. That's the person who has the floor. The other term that comes up once in a while is the relay language. So with all of my examples so far, I've assumed that the interpreter understands the floor language. So if I speak in English, your interpreter from English to Urdu or to Hindi or to Arabic, whatever it might be. Now, sometimes I might speak a weirder language, like I'm from Sweden originally, so if I speak Swedish, maybe there's no Swedish to the interpreter, right? So instead, you might have someone who can interpret from Swedish into English, and then someone can interpret from English to Urdu, for example, or Hindi, whatever it might be. So that kind of bridge language is called a relay. So we have several different technologies. You'll see this slide looks very similar to the assistive listening. Same kind of idea that depending on the situation, different technologies fit better. So Digi-Wave works for a portable solution. We can have up to 14 languages plus the floor or original language. Infrared, same idea again, really secure, stays in the room, kind of foolproof, but our limitation is we can only do 4 languages. Wi-Fi, similar idea. If you want the BYOD solution, this is your option. Or if you have a lot of different languages, because we can connect 8 times 8 channel and go all the way up to 64 languages. Then finally, FM is, again, large coverage area, pretty easy install. We can do up to 8 languages. Then the final item is IC2. So that is for the interpreters. It's pretty simple device. And all it does really is usually if you have a big official event, you will have every interpreter working for about 20 minutes. Then you need to take a break and take turns. So you have 2 interpreters connected to the same device, and they decide, whose turn is it to talk. They can choose if they are the relay language. Again, if they are the ones translating from Swedish to English that everybody can listen to. So just a few functions, a few knobs, and this then will be combined with any of these technologies. So this doesn't send out the signal wirelessly. You need to combine it with a transmitter. Okay, the other thing we started doing very recently last year is AI-based real-time translation. So we say translation rather than interpretation because it is a slightly different thing, right? And it's different than a human interpreter, and it's written. So after the break, I can hopefully give you guys a live demonstration, but the idea is you getting text on a screen rather than something to listen to. So there is a license fee, but it's a lot more economical than getting a professionally trained interpreter. So the idea is hopefully to be able to provide language support in a lot of situations where it's just not feasible to hire a live human interpreter. And there's probably some situations, say for example, I'm an exchange student. I know if they're teaching languages in English, I know it pretty well, but I may be new to the country. I'm originally speaking Chinese, whatever the language might be. So you want to listen to English still, so you learn it, but if you could have some subtitles in Chinese, it would help you. So in certain applications, that's probably better fit than if you were to have an interpreter and only listen to Chinese, for example. So I talked a little bit about this already. How with Digi-Wave, you get one channel in your ear, and you can send out on another channel with the same device. We also have a quick change mode. So if you have switching between 2 languages all the time, like I mentioned Nintendo before, we have a lot of Japanese company where they have expats come in and they switch back and forth all the time, going from Japanese to English. So this, with your up-down buttons here, you switch back and forth. And this is not used very much, but we also have the option of using a relay with Digi-Wave. So in a fixed interpretation setting, again, we're going to have the Digi-Wave Connect to be able to take an input from a floor language. And then the same idea that the rest is wireless. The interpreter console, what is it? IC2, interpreter console for 2 interpreters. IC stands for interpreter console. 2 does not stand for 2 interpreters. We had an IC1 before, but yeah, it's not a very complicated part number. So it can be coupled with any of our wireless technologies or somebody else's. You can link up to 20 units. We support 1 relay language. So in reality, it's usually a good fit when there's up to 4 or 5 languages. If you have a situation where you have 20 languages, you probably want to spend a couple of $100,000 for your interpretation system, rather than, I think the IC2 is about $2,000. It's pretty easy for an interpreter. The blue is what you listen to. You listen to the floor relay. Red is your speak or mute button, and the yellow shows what's being active. So your simplest configuration is you're just using this for the interpreter to switch back and forth to have a convenient way to connect their microphone. Here's a complicated one. So there is no test, so you don't have to know this. But anyways, this is a multi-language situation. So you have the floor language, the presenter is speaking German. We have 2 interpreters that take turns interpreting from German into English. We can have a throughput. So if we have anyone who needs assistive listening, they want to listen to the original German, they can do that. Now, the main point is to also provide a translated language. So we're having an output from the IC2 to, in this case, a Digi-Wave unit that's sending out on Digi-Wave channel 2. So with my receiver, I will listen to channel 2 and I can listen to English. Now, this audio stream can also be connected to other devices. So I can send both the floor language, the German, as well as the English translation. So then for the next language, we have French, okay? We have some French visitors. So these guys are listening to German, they're speaking French, and French is being sent out on another channel. Now the last ones are Arabic. So our Arabic translator, or interpreter, sorry, does not know German. So he has to listen to English. So he can now listen to the English. We connect this to another wireless device. Another example, it's a Digi-Wave transceiver, could be an FM transmitter, infrared transmitter, and he's sending out Arabic on another channel. Does that make sense? Yeah, people are nodding, that's good. Any questions on this? No? So we will show the slides afterwards. So I won't go into this in too much detail, but the main idea is you're connecting the different IC2s with Cat5 cable, and then you can take an out either channel 1 or channel 2. So for most situations, you will just have one output that then goes to your wireless technology. But you can also output the floor language, which in this case, you will have 2 outputs. So, correct, yeah. So you only need to connect your floor, your presenter language, to one IC2. It could be connected to any one of these, and it gets sent up and down the chain. Okay, so let's take maybe a 5-minute break, and I'll set this up, and that will be the last part of the day then, before lunch. Okay, should we get started again? Okay. So I'll speak slowly. So basically what I like to do is, this is the last part of the presentation. I'll talk about our new AI-based translation systems. As you can see, I'm speaking English and we're getting some AI-based translation into Arabic on the bottom of the screen. So with this, this is a new system that we developed last year, and it's just coming into the market now. So this system, this is this device right here that we call the Convey video. And what it does is it provides automatic AI-based translation. So I have a microphone or an output from a DSP, feeding that into the box. We're having an HDMI output that's going out on a screen, and with that, we can then overlay the output in another language. So we have 109 languages available, and you can do any combination of these languages. So right now I'm speaking in English, obviously, and you can see the translation to Arabic. But let me maybe change the language for a second. So, because it's obviously you guys all know English. Otherwise, again, this would be an extremely boring training. So let me change it to Swedish. Anybody speak Swedish here? No? Malia? I'm so disappointed. So this will be a little bit of a real test. So I'll go down. Let's choose Swedish and let's translate to English. Okej, jag ska prova att prata svenska. Vi ska se om ni förstår svenska. Det är väldigt roligt att vara här i Dubai. Och det är roligt att träffa er allihopa. Jag hoppas att alla mår bra. Det är varmt och fint väder här. Det är mycket varmare än i Sverige. Och det finns ingen snö. So, the big question is, did you understand me? So you all understand Swedish now. That's fantastic. Yes. It depends a little bit on your topics, etc., but it's up to 94% accurate. So, you know, interpreters are amazing people because it's really hard to listen to something and translate at the same time. So we were looking for some studies. We found some from the American Translators Association, which they had determined that the accurate of an interpreter is about 83 to 87%. So we're not saying that our system is better, but it can be potentially in the same range. And so both. So we have investigated several different AI-based engines. So right now, for this system today, we're partnered with Google, but That might change or develop in the future, but that's what we're doing right now. So the benefit of that or any of the big engines is, you know, it's just not people using our box, right? Every day it gets better. What we're doing, which is a hard thing to do, so we worked on this for about 2 years. I mean, obviously you can do Google Translate on your phone, but the key is to get out a nice even rhythm. So I can speak, I can be presenter, and I can continue speaking for an hour, half hour, and you're getting something on the bottom that comes out in an even pattern and makes sense. So that's the part of algorithm that is ours, but as far as the engine itself, that is Google today.
How many languages?
We
All the 7197 languages?
109 languages, yeah. And in addition to the languages, we also have additional dialects. So, you know, for Arabic, for example, we have Lebanese Arabic, Qatari Arabic, most of the various countries. For English, we have Jamaican English, British English, American English, etc. So the idea is, ideally, you set up the system to take in the exact dialect that you're aiming for. So let me just go through a couple of slides, and then, you know, if someone wants to look at other languages and stuff, we can do that after we do the official part, and we can, if you guys want to play around a little bit with it. So let me share this in Teams again. I think I'm still sharing, so. Let me sorry, let me find my place here, and we'll go from there. Okay. Okay, so we talked about interpretation. We worked with interpretation for a long time. So this is just another solution for certain situations. And I think, you know, you asked about accuracy. So if you have a well-trained, university-trained professional interpreter, he can probably reach 90% or even more higher accuracy. But for some other languages, it's really hard to find professional interpreters, right? So if you compare to somebody who is just self-taught, it might be hard to find an interpreter, and this might be more accurate. There's a big market for language services around the world. So this is how it works. You just saw it, right? You have one language coming in. You have subtitles on the screen. We talked about the accuracy already, so depending on your context, we can be comparable to live human interpreters. Data privacy is a question that comes up. So our engine that we works with currently, Google, has to conform to local laws in the country they're operating in. We'll share the slides. You have some links to what that means. And as Williams, we never access your box. We never look at any data. So these are the languages that are available. There are some of them that are only available as input, but most of them are available to go in both directions. So this is available on our website as well. So we just did an upgrade from 27 to 109 languages. So some of the languages we added were some of the Indian languages, for example, that we didn't have previously. So here's the video flow. we're having live video come in via HDMI. Could be a laptop, like you saw, I only had my desktop here before. Could be a document camera, could be any kind of live camera. We have audio coming in either from a microphone or a DSP. That goes out over the internet, which is where we use our neural engine. So you do need a live hardwired internet connection for the system to work. And that's then getting overlaid. There's an HDMI out that goes out to a big screen or matrix mixer, whatever the situation. Yeah. So here's the connection guide. The mouse is how I pull up my menu, like this. You can also use third-party control. So we have telnet commands if you want to program a Crestron QSC controller, anything like that. Touchscreen, if you want to, instead of using the mouse, access your menu with touchscreen, you can do that. And the keyboard is really only needed for the initial setup. So we have a couple of different options for your setup. In the interest of time, I didn't go into that before, but we have a version that we call Caption Assist, which basically does the same thing, except a very important part, it doesn't provide the translations. If I speak in English, my text will come out in English. If I speak in Arabic, my text comes out in Arabic, etc. So the functionality of Caption Assist is to provide assistive listening for somebody who's hard of hearing or deaf. With a Convey unit that provides translation, you can decide to only show the presenter language if you want. Or you can have just a translate language. So in most situations, that's what you will do. For demonstration purposes right now, I had both the original language as well as the translated language. Archiving. So you have the ability to save the original language as a text file, the translated language as a text file, as well as the audio input that's coming into the box and the final produced video. So we're actually having a few people using this for broadcast as well, just to do recording and add translation. We also have option if you want timestamps. We're talking to a few court system. That's very important for them. So you can have a clock on the screen if you choose to. And for the text file, if you have that option, you can also add timestamps to the text file, so it's easy to find what's where. Text background, I think I had the translucent option on right now. You can have a firm, opaque text box. You can be completely transparent, depending on your need. So you see the different examples here from no text box to translucent to opaque. We have some different options for the colors of the text box as well as the text itself. There is a, if you want the box, you have to buy it. We're not giving them away for free. SNMK wants to make money, and us too. But there is another portion of it is we are actually charged from the neural engine per character and word we use. So what we're doing is we're transforming that into an hourly cost. So for anyone using the box, there is a license fee as well. So we have an online portal that you sign up to, and then you get charged depending on your usage. And yeah, it looks pretty self-explanatory. So some spaces where Convey video might work is, spaces where it's not practical to have a live interpreter. Like for a training like this, probably, you wouldn't bring in an interpreter, but depending on your country, your audience, it could be helpful to have the text on the screen. So like in universities, you don't really see an interpreter coming in from lectures, but it might be really helpful, especially if you have a high number of, foreign students from a particular country. So we're looking at universities, corporate, house of worship, judicial, we have some broadcast and TV production, event production, as well as government. So we're actually working on a few government projects in the region for this solution as well. And the application can be teaching, presentations, official proceedings, whether it's court, police, as well as distance learning and webinars. We have a whole host of resources if you want to learn more about this specific product on the website as well. That's really it. So do you guys have any questions about the Convey video unit, about any of our other products?
Can we have the copy of the slides later?
Yes. So Malia, you will arrange that, right? If I share them with you, copy of the slides?
I'll send it probably today or tomorrow with the recording of the session. We have an online question.
Yeah.
Why are there 4 channels in the IR system?
So mostly for interpretation purposes. So for assistive listening, we don't need 4 channels, but for interpretation, sometimes we have 4 different languages.
Yeah, but why is there a limitation of 4?
Oh, the limitation that way. It has to do with the frequencies we're using. So yeah, and it's pretty common for the type of infrared system that the infrared system for the analog infrared system usually is 4 channels.
Answer the question. Anyone else online questions they can have?
Okay. Okay. Meanwhile, any questions from the room?
Not a question specifically, but is there any option wherein for the AI-based